Central banks bought a record 1,136 tons of gold last year and followed that up with another 228 tons in just the first quarter alone. That's the most ever in a first quarter. Central bank gold demand saw its highest first half on record, dating back to the year 2000, the World Gold Council said. Also, Lewis Street, which is the senior markets analyst at the World Gold Council, commented, and I quote, "Record central bank demand has dominated the gold market over the last year. And despite a slower pace in the second quarter, this trend underscores gold's importance as a safe haven asset amid ongoing geopolitical tensions and challenging economic conditions around the world." But even more so, on a year-to-date basis, central banks have bought an astonishing net 800 tons. That's 14% higher than the same exact period last year.
Connection established.
Welcome back, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is Silver Slayer, the channel that brings you silver videos every single day of the week. So make sure you subscribe and definitely click the bell so you immediately get notified when I post a video, especially since there's a lot of important stuff that's happening around the world and I cover it all. You will never miss a beat. So will 2024 be the year for precious metals? What do you think? I always like when you guys comment in these videos and throw your 2 cents in because, you know, there's a lot of different factors. And that's also why I try to cover so many different types of articles from so many different sources, because I like staying open-minded and looking at different people's opinions and ideas. Even if I don't necessarily agree with them, I could still learn something from it, especially with the world the way it is nowadays. So let's dive into this article titled, "Will 2024 be the year for precious metals?" You guys can see earlier in the introduction why I chose this article, because they do hit some different points that I wanted to touch upon, along with why banks are buying so much gold and silver if everyone's claiming it's not worth anything. It's almost like they know something the public doesn't. So gold and silver have both held up quite well despite the Fed's tightening cycle, with gold gaining 12.6% year to date and silver more or less flat, beginning 2023 at $24 an ounce and trading around $24.29 at the time of writing this. But that doesn't tell the whole story of silver. There have been some wild swings, with the white metal falling as low as $20 in March and climbing just over $26 in May. And yet silver is a wild ride. It is a roller coaster that if you have a weak stomach, I highly recommend you don't jump on. It's like gold on steroids. It's like the little brother that's more exaggerated. It hits higher highs and lower lows, bringing more risk, but also more reward for those who try to trade in between, which I highly don't recommend anyways. Just buy it and hold it. But it's a fact that silver is much more volatile, and that's because it's a much smaller market than gold. So let's just jump into some gold. So the Federal Reserve's interest rate pause due to successfully lowering inflation and apparently coming subsequent pivot to reducing interest rates in 2024, which is good news for commodities. Lower rates will cause the dollar to weaken and commodity prices to rise. And positive real interest rates, which favor bond investors, turn negative, it will especially affect gold and silver prices to the upside. There's so many different variables are incorporated in 2024 that are all pointing towards higher prices. Every single day I cover an article that brings a new angle into play. So the case for gold revolves around 3 main factors: an increasingly dovish Fed monetary policy, unsustainably high debt fueled by excessive government spending, and central bank buying. We first pointed out this clash between the federal government and the Federal Reserve back in 2018 when Trump was president. The Fed, at the time of raising interest rates to the disappointment of Trump, who wanted to keep them low. Consider this. As the Fed has pursued a tight monetary policy, unwinding its balance sheet and raising interest rates, the Treasury has been printing money that the federal government keeps spending to fulfill its many promises. promises that are unfulfillable. The Biden administration's three signature piece of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and CHIPS and Science Act are costing trillions. Trillions that we don't have. And remember, too, that most of this promised money has yet to be spent. Unsurprisingly, inflation has added a huge chunk to the construction project costs, which also meant delays. An Economist article notes that the biggest component of the infrastructure package was a 50% increase in funding for highways to $350 billion over 5 years. But highway construction costs soared by more than 50% from the end of 2020 to the start of 2023, in effect wiping out the extra funding. The federal government keeps spending money and the Treasury keeps printing it to cover the deficits, which keep mounting. Around $13 trillion in government debt is expected to roll over next year at much higher rates, meaning more money printing is on the way. And on top of that, actually, some states are bringing back the gold standard. I just made a video about this yesterday, or 2 days ago now for you, that Missouri and Oklahoma are now bringing back the gold standard, or going to. There's already a couple states, and I think like 20 something have signed up to do this. So there's a lot happening. And when you talk about a global reset or a global financial reset, it's happening right before our eyes. A lot of people, I think, just don't want to acknowledge it, almost like this out of sight, out of mind, or they just are oblivious or are just completely ignorant to what's happening around the world, which is very scary. So in a recent interview with Bloomberg, Pierre Lassonade, he said, and this is from Nevada Mining, he said he believes the US dollar has peaked and gold is the anti-US dollar. So that is one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on gold for 2024. And when you say gold, you could replace that with silver, because silver is working directly with gold, but silver does have this other angle that gives it more opportunity, in my opinion. Arguably, the main reason central banks are buying gold is because gold is the solution to monetary debasement, as we wrote in previous articles. In the extreme hypothetical case where all other asset classes are destroyed, including currency itself, only gold remains. And that's why gold has lasted for 5,000 years as money, since the beginning of man, where every fiat-based system lasts around a century. So Daniel Lassalle writes, gold is now the only real defense against the loss of the purchasing power of fiat currencies. And I always say, gold and silver are, right? Remember when they say gold, you could say silver as well, because silver is still considered a monetary metal. And we could even take that a step further and say it literally is again, since they're bringing back the gold standard. Not just theoretically speaking, it really is. It is the only real defense. And that's why when I tell people you need to protect yourself or protect your wealth, or if it could be as extreme as life and death to some extent. We're talking about security. We're talking about transactions. We're talking about SHTF, prepping, bartering. This could be the difference between food and water and shelter. If you have no money, if all of your wealth is just in a bank account and let's say the banks fail or the grid goes off, what are you going to have for your family to trade with, to barter with? Cans aren't going to do enough. Jugs of water is not going to do enough. You need precious metals. You have to have it, especially since the dollar's already lost nearly all of its purchasing power, 98%. What's going to happen when that number hits 99%? Even if it doesn't, the money sitting in your bank is still rotting away. Considering central banks are looking to impose their own digital currencies, gold proves again it is an essential asset in a portfolio where investors are trying to escape the collapse of money as we know it. Why do you think all these banks are buying boatloads of gold and silver around the world? India is buying massive amounts. Russia, massive amounts. China, massive amounts. Why? Why are they? If there's no significance to precious metals, why are they all buying so much gold and silver? It's because that is what wealth is. Gold is the solution to currency debasement. Two headlines picked this week from my news feed indicate that the dollar debasement trend is real and accelerating. Visual Capitalist report says global government debt is projected to hit $97.1 trillion this year, and that's a 40% increase since 2019. That is insane. In a table of general government gross debt, the U.S. is top of the heap with debt to GDP ratio of 123.3%. This compares to a world average of 90%. Just as U.S. debt has ballooned, so has Canada's, now ranked 10th globally at 106.4%. So we're talking about the United States, which is the world's reserve currency, is at the top of the list. That is scary. There's even a chart right here showing we're 34 or 33 trillion dollars, China's 14 trillion, Japan is 10 trillion, UK is only 3 trillion. And wow, that's actually interesting. But I guess as the USD is the reserve currency, that might give it a different edge, why it's double of anyone else. So while the dollar is the most important unit of account for international trade, the main medium of exchange for settling international transactions and store of value for central banks, de-dollarization, is being pursued by countries with agendas to odds with the U.S., including Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And these are, they're talking about the BRICS nations by this point. So according to Markets Insider, China and Russia have now almost completely phased out their use of the U.S. dollar in bilateral trade. More than 90% of trade between the two countries is now denominated in the Russian ruble or Chinese yuan, and trade between them expands this year due to Western sanctions. And that also made Russia more reliant on China for trade. Prime Minister of Russia reportedly said total transactions hit a record of $200 billion this year, while Russia-U.S. trade plummeted to a 30-year low. So now they go into silver, but this article is already pretty long, so I'm just going to highlight a few points. So according to the 2023 World Silver Survey, the global silver market was undersupplied by 237.7 million ounces in 2022, which is possibly the most significant deficit on record. It took just 2 years of undersupply, the 2022 deficit in the 51.1 million ounce shortfall from 2021, to wipe out the cumulative surpluses from the previous decade. It took 2 years to wipe out all of the surplus we've had in the last decade. And then mine production's falling while demand is over a billion, well over a billion ounces. I covered an interview with Keith Neumeyer, which is the CEO of First Majestic Silver, which also talks a lot about silver demand or the silver shortage. So things are only getting crazier on that note. If you guys want to check out that, just check out some of the recent videos. I also made the video showing Keith Neumeyer and Phillips Baker, which is the CEO of Hecla Mining. Both of these people dig silver out of the ground, but both of those people had two completely different things to say about the silver shortage, which is pretty interesting. But regardless, like this says, Metals Focus believes the deficit will persist in the silver market for the foreseeable future. So yeah, a lot's going to be happening. A lot is happening for 2024, but I can tell you one thing, gold and silver is still going to be on top. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Thanks for tuning in. This was Silver Slayer. I'll see you guys later. Peace.